We all have a primal, built-in fear of the edge. It's that sudden cold drop in your stomach when you stand too close to a sheer cliff, where every instinct in your brain is violently screaming at you to step back. But what happens when stepping back simply isn't an option? What happens when that terrifying edge isn't a modern extreme sport or a viral tourist attraction, but the absolute only way to get home? Deep in the remote, jagged mountains of southwest China lies a place that completely defies gravity, logic, and our modern understanding of safety. A place where the margin of error between life and a lethal 1,000-foot freefall is measured by a few inches of weathered stone. This is the story of Yunnan's path along the abyss. It is a raw, staggering monument to human willpower, a place where survival didn't just mean fighting the brutal elements, but walking a daily, high-stakes tightrope over absolute nothingness. Picture this, a trail so narrow and perilous, it looks like a heavy CGI effect from a Hollywood thriller. But for generations in the remote mountains of southwest China, this wasn't an exaggerated movie scene. It was reality. We are talking about literal lifelines carved into the sides of sheer, unforgiving cliffs, passages suspended over absolute nothingness, where people carried goods, livestock, and their entire livelihoods through otherwise inaccessible terrain. This is Yunnan, once a crucial beating artery of the legendary ancient T-horse road. Imagine traversing a landscape where the mountains are so jagged that simply getting from point A to point B required defying gravity. On some of the best preserved sections today, you can still see how these routes run directly along vertical rock faces, defying both nature and logic. It wasn't just a matter of walking near the edge. In the most treacherous spots, locals had to drill directly into the raw stone to construct makeshift walkways. Imagine stepping onto ancient, weathered wooden beams and ladder-like platforms anchored straight into the mountain wall. Beneath every single step lies a dizzying, deadly drop into an unforgiving gorge. When you stand on a path like this in Yunnan, your entire definition of a road fundamentally changes. In most parts of the modern world, a road is just a convenient paved connection between two towns. But here, suspended high between the clouds and the jagged rocks below, a road is not a convenience. It is a relentless psychological test.
It is nothing more than a fragile strip separating solid stone from pure emptiness. You balance on a few creaking wooden planks, keeping one hand pressed flat against the rough, cold rock. You look down, and there is nothing but thin air, heavy silence, and the overwhelming, almost terrifying realization of exactly how incredibly small a human being truly is against the massive scale of this landscape. For anyone looking at it from the outside, this trail feels like a once-in-a-lifetime extreme dare, the kind of place you survive once and swear to never, ever walk again. But that's the wildest part about Yunnan. For the people born into these mountains, navigating this terrifying void wasn't an adrenaline rush or an adventure. It wasn't a sensation. It was just ordinary life.
Imagine this path isn't a hike you chose for the weekend. It's simply the road to the next village. Now, picture walking that exact same crumbling, vertigo-inducing ledge, but instead of wearing high-tech hiking gear, you are carrying massive, crushing loads on your back. For the people of Yunnan, this wasn't an extreme sport, it was the daily commute. These sheer, terrifying drops were the vital routes upon which supplies, commerce, and the survival of entire families depended. The ancient T-horse road wasn't just a romantic trade route you read about in history books, it was a brutal, unforgiving gauntlet. Goods had to move, livestock had to be guided, and whether the mountain was slick with rain or battered by fierce winds, the journey had to be made. That is exactly what makes standing in a place like this so incredibly powerful. The true weight of this landscape doesn't just come from its obvious lethal danger. It comes from the calm, absolute normality with which the local people adapted to it. They looked at a seemingly impossible, deadly barrier and simply figured out how to live right on its edges. Most of us would take one look over the side of that weathered wooden plank, stare into the bottomless gorge, and immediately turn back. But human perspective completely shifts when your livelihood is on the line. Where outsiders look down and see only a terrifying abyss, the people of these mountains look forward and see direction. It is a profound, almost unimaginable shift in mindset. Where anyone else would freeze in fear, paralyzed by the sheer drop below, these villagers and merchants just continued walking. They intimately understood the risks and respected the deadly drops, but they completely refused to let a hostile geography dictate their boundaries. You quickly realize that this trail is far more than just a physical pathway cut into stone. It is a towering monument to human resilience. It makes you wonder what kind of grit it takes to treat a daily tightrope walk as just another routine chore. The emptiness is always there, waiting silently just inches away, but the mind stays locked entirely on the single next step forward.
Think about how we typically define a home. For most of us, it represents comfort, predictability, and a safe retreat from the outside world. But standing on the edge of these terrifying drops completely shatters that cozy illusion. The true, undeniable strength of these remote regions is the profound realization they force upon you. Home isn't always built where the world is gentle, soft, or accommodating. Sometimes a home is carved out of an environment where simply surviving is an active, deliberate choice. It is created in a harsh, vertical landscape where every single step out of your front door demands absolute razor-sharp focus. You cannot afford the luxury of letting your mind wander when one misplaced boot on a damp, rotting plank means a permanent fall into the gorge below.
In this gravity-defying world, the sheer stone cliffs offer absolutely zero comfort. There are no modern safety nets here, no steel guardrails to catch you if you happen to stumble. And then there is the high-altitude wind, a relentless, howling force tearing through the narrow mountain canyons, speaking much harsher than words ever could, constantly reminding you of who is truly in charge out here. To build a life in a place like this means you have to make absolute peace with the extreme. It requires a gritty, unspoken mental toughness that most of us living in a modern, paved world rarely ever have to tap into. The generations who walked these paths didn't just survive the brutal elements, they absorbed them, building a culture and a community right on the razor's edge of disaster.
When you truly take all of this in, your entire perspective of the region shifts. You quickly realize that Yunnan is so much more than just a spectacularly beautiful, highly photogenic mountain landscape. It is a raw, unfiltered environment that strips away everything unnecessary, setting the stage for a much deeper story about human endurance. This place isn't just a destination, it is a profound beginning. It's the exact point where the journey strips away all your modern expectations and immediately reveals what this entire experience is truly about. You aren't just looking at ancient rock and weathered wood anymore. You are staring at the ultimate testament to the human spirit etched directly into the side of a mountain.
This story is fundamentally about people who entirely rejected the comfortable, easy edges of the world. They didn't choose the flat, safe valleys or the predictable plains. They built their entire existence in places where the roads are suffocatingly narrow, the mountains are impossibly steep, and the distances between communities are vast and unforgiving. And the most incredible part? They stayed anyway. When modern society tells us a location is uninhabitable, our first instinct is to pack up and leave. But that simply wasn't the mindset here. Generation after generation looked at these brutal, isolating cliffs and decided to anchor their lives right into the stone. They forged deep roots and carved out a vibrant existence in an environment that literally threatens to push you off the edge every single day. You leave a place like Yunnan with a completely rewired perspective on what it means to be resilient. You realize that sometimes simply surviving in a harsh vertical world is the ultimate act of defiance. Every single time a local strapped a heavy load to their back and stepped out over that terrifying void, they were proving that quiet human willpower can outmatch the most brutal geography on the planet. It leaves you with a lingering, powerful truth that hits harder than anything you could ever read in a book. Out here, bravery isn't some grand cinematic battle or a single fleeting moment of glory. Bravery is simply putting one foot in front of the other on a creaking wooden plank suspended over a bottomless gorge. Because in places like this, the road itself is already the absolute purest form of courage.